Part 1. No stalls, no privacy. No problem, let's start with the obvious. The Wild West had no plumbing, no toilets, no stalls, no doors to close behind you. Just you, the wide open prairie, and whatever you could find to squat behind. If you thought surviving a cattle drive was rough, wait until you realize every call of nature meant a tactical operation. Cowboys didn't get the luxury of planning. When nature called on the open range, it called loud and without much warning. Maybe it was right after breakfast beans, maybe after 10 miles in the saddle. And when it happened, you didn't excuse yourself. You grabbed your bedroll or hat to hide behind, scanned the horizon for witnesses, and hoped the wind was going the right way. There were no outhouses on cattle drives, no tidy log cabins tucked behind the saloon, just brush, rocks, and the occasional clump of mesquite. In some places, even that was too much to ask for. Flat prairie, nothing to squat behind, windy ridge. Good luck keeping your balance. Winter, the ground's frozen. Solid. Welcome to frontier life. So how did they deal with privacy? They didn't. Cowboys were practical. If they had to go, they went. They'd walk a little ways from camp, not too far, because of snakes, scorpions, and the ever-present chance of coyotes watching from the shadows. Then they'd turn their back to the fire, face the stars, and hope nobody made eye contact. It wasn't just cowboys either. Pioneers, gold rushers, and soldiers all had their own tricks. Some dug small trenches, which doubled as latrines. Others used the back side of a wagon wheel for cover. In winter, some would squat over embers from an old fire, not too close, unless you liked surprises. And when the terrain allowed, a nice flat rock was better than nothing. But what about wiping? That's where it gets creative and historically itchy. Toilet paper wasn't standard. Most used what they had: leaves, grass, corn husks, saddle, rags, even scraps of newspaper if they were lucky. Pinnacones were a bad idea. Cactus worse. One wrong move and you'd be walking funny for days. And yes, cowboys shared stories about it. Some made jokes, others kept quiet. There were unwritten rules. Don't use someone's blanket. Don't leave your spot near the water source. And above all, bury it. A good cowboy buried his business like it was treasure. You didn't want flies circling your bedroll at night. Hygiene was a luxury. Soap was rare. Clean water was precious. Cowboys didn't always wash their hands afterward, not because they were lazy, but because water was for drinking, not scrubbing. The result? A lot of stomach bugs, a lot of cursing, and a lot of prairie belly. And yet, it became routine. Wake up, stretch, check the horizon, grab your bandana, and disappear into the brush. Some even had favorite spots. Others got creative with saddlebags and hanging blankets. One trail boss was said to build a privacy wall out of stacked canteens. Desperate times, desperate solutions. It was never glamorous, but nobody expected it to be. On the frontier, you didn't get comfort. You got practicality. If you could squat, wipe, and return without stepping in something unfortunate, you were winning. By the time a cowboy was a week into a cattle drive, he'd already figured out the two golden rules of prairie relief. Go fast and never let your guard down. That's because you weren't just battling your bowels, you were up against nature itself. Let's start with the wildlife. Coyotes weren't the worst of it. At least they kept their distance. The real issue was rattlesnakes. Imagine dropping your pants near a pile of sun-warmed rocks, only to hear that dry rattle from behind a cactus. More than one cowboy got bit somewhere. No man wants to get bit. And the shame lasted longer than the swelling. Scorpions were another nightmare. They liked warm, dark places, like under a saddlebag or inside an abandoned boot. Or worse, under the very rock you picked to squat behind. There's a reason many cowboys carried a stick when stepping off trail, not for walking, but for poking around before settling in. You didn't want to sit down and stand back up screaming. Then came the weather. Wind, in particular, could be your enemy or your savior. On calm days, your scent stayed local. But on bad days, one gust in the wrong direction and camp would know exactly what you were up to. Rain, muddy disaster, snow. You're squatting in freezing temperatures trying to do your business before your rear end goes numb. One cowboy wrote in his journal, that a snowstorm once froze his trousers mid-process. He called it a personal betrayal by nature. Newcomers, the greenhorns, were the butt of many jokes. They'd wander off too far and get lost, or worse, try to go in the dark without a lantern. Imagine waking up to find your boots missing and realizing you left them too close to the scene. Trail veterans knew better. They picked high ground, watched for ants, and always marked their spot with a rock or stick. You didn't want to revisit someone else's mess in the morning haze. There was also a strict code about what not to touch. No one, and I mean no one, reused rags without boiling them. And any cowboy who got lazy and used another man's saddle blanket paid for it dearly. Fights broke out over less. Hygiene may have been minimal, but respect was mandatory. To combat the smell. Some cowboys burned dried sagebrush or buffalo chips near camp. Others claimed whiskey helped sterilize the air. That was a lie, but it gave them an excuse to take a swig. A few more civilized types carried little pouches of peppermint leaves to mask odors, though most just held their breath and dealt with it. Trail cooks were particularly sensitive to where business was done. They'd threaten to toss out any man who went too close to the chuck wagon area. After all, no one wanted to eat beans while swatting flies that just came from someone's visit. The unwritten rule was, if you could see the fire, you were too close. And if the wind was blowing toward the cook, you'd better run. Some herdsmen carried small spades for digging quick holes. Others used their boot heels to scratch out a trench. But sometimes, there just wasn't time, like during a stampede, or in the middle of night watch. Then it was a mad dash behind the nearest bush with your trousers halfway down, and one eye on the stars. Despite all this, there was a strange pride in mastering the art of prairie relief. The men who could handle it with speed, grace, and minimal cleanup were legends in their own right. They were the quiet heroes of the trail, never praised but always respected. One trail boss even held an unofficial contest each drive. Who could find the most creative facility? The winner one year built a seat out of broken fence posts, complete with armrests and a view. Another hollowed out a tree stump and lined it with buffalo hide. It wasn't pretty, but it beat squatting over an anthill. And then there were the stories, tall tales, passed around fires at night. One man claimed he once outran a pack of wolves mid-process. Another said he used a rattlesnake skin as emergency paper. Nobody believed him. A third insisted he'd done his business standing up during a lightning storm to show dominance. None of it was true, but everyone listened anyway. The truth was, when you live outdoors long enough, nothing is truly embarrassing anymore. Not after you've done what needed doing. In front of cattle, coyotes, or the occasional laughing crewmate. Cowboys didn't seek dignity. They just aimed to get through it without falling over. Part 3. If the prairie was unforgiving by day, it was downright cruel at night. When the stars came out and the fire burned low, cowboys faced new challenges, and their nightly bathroom routine didn't get any easier. First, there was darkness. Deep, pitch-black darkness. No city lights, no porch lamps, just the moon and your instincts. Most cowboys kept a lantern or a burning stick handy, but if nature called at 3 a.m., chances were you were stumbling through brush barefoot, half asleep, and trying not to fall into a hole. And then came the noises: coyotes howling, owls screeching, distant stomps from restless cattle. You never quite knew if something was watching you from beyond the ridge. Some men claimed to see mountain lions blinking at them from the dark. Others swore they heard whispers. Whether it was nerves or truth, one thing was certain: doing your business at night meant being exposed, literally and figuratively. The cold added another layer of misery. In the winter, even pulling down your pants felt like a death sentence. Cowboys would do everything in their power to delay it till morning. But sometimes that wasn't an option. A hot cup of coffee and a cold breeze could make for an urgent and miserable trip beyond the wagons. Camp etiquette was strict. You didn't walk through another man's bedroll path. You didn't relieve yourself anywhere near the water barrels. And if someone was already out there, you waited. Nothing broke camp unity faster than stepping where someone else just squatted. It wasn't talked about, but it was understood. Respect meant keeping your distance and covering your tracks. Some cowboys got clever. They dug personal night holes with logs or boards nearby, marking them with stones. Others fashioned crude toilet seats out of wagon planks and propped them behind bushes. These weren't luxuries, they were acts of survival. Every time you didn't trip, fall, or get bitten in the dark was considered a victory. The environment didn't help. High winds scattered everything, including your wiping material. More than one man cursed the prairie after, chasing a torn bit of cloth down a hill, pants around his ankles, dignity in free fall. Others carried weighted stones to hold down leaves or cloth, creating makeshift holders in the grass. Practicality reigned. There were traditions, too. Some drives had a signal, 3 coughs, a whistle, or even a cowboy song hummed low to let others know occupied. If you heard it, you gave space. If you ignored it, expect consequences. Cowboys may not have had walls, but they still respected each other's space. That, more than anything, kept them from going completely feral. Stories from these nights became legend. One greenhorn reportedly sat in poison ivy for 10 minutes before realizing it wasn't clover. Another man fell asleep mid-squat and toppled backward into a puddle. And the infamous skunk incident, where a half-blind old wrangler mistook a black and white tail for brush, was rattled for years. These weren't just bathroom stories. They were bonding moments, pieces of the cowboy myth passed between generations. Because out there, under the stars, far from any comfort or privacy, what you did in the dark was as much a part of the job as herding cattle. They didn't complain. Well, maybe a little, but mostly they adapted. Every cowboy learned to find humor in the discomfort, to laugh off embarrassment, and to help a fellow trailmate in need, even if it meant tossing him a clean rag at the worst moment. By the end of a drive, most men could go anywhere, anytime, under any conditions, and do it without a fuss. It was part of becoming trail tough. You weren't a real cowboy until you'd done your business in the middle of a lightning storm, 5 feet from a snake hole, while whispering a prayer to the prairie gods. That kind of grit didn't show up in dime novels, but ask any old cowboy what truly made the West wild, and he might just point to the moment he squatted at midnight and locked eyes with a wildcat. For by the time a cattle drive was halfway through, cowboys didn't just get used to the routine, they owned it. And part of that ownership meant finding creative solutions for nature's call, no matter how rough, rugged, or ridiculous. Trail veterans knew all the tricks. One old-timer swore by digging to holes, one for business, one for privacy. He'd sit behind a sage bush and let the second hole catch the wind so no scent wafted toward camp. Was it scientific? No, but it worked well enough to earn him the nickname Double Ditch Dan. Some turned it into ritual. A few cowboys made morning trips a kind of meditation, picking the same quiet spot, watching the sun come up, maybe chewing on a stick of tobacco. Others turned it competitive. There were contests over who could go fastest, who could find the most scenic spot, or who could get it done without removing their hat. Every now and then, a cowboy tried to add a touch of civility. One man dragged a broken rocking chair out of an abandoned barn and placed it over a dugout like a throne. He used it exactly once before the wood cracked, sending him tumbling into the hole. Another tried to hang a bedsheet between 2 wagon wheels for privacy. A wind gust ended that idea in seconds. What mattered most was respect. Cowboys didn't laugh much if someone had an accident. They didn't point if a guy came back with dust on his boots and shame on his face, because next time, it could be them. That unspoken code kept the trail bearable, even during the worst moments. Cowboys also passed on advice to the younger riders. Don't eat beans before a long ride. Check the ground for ants, always. If the grass is too green, it's probably wet for a reason. These weren't just tips. They were survival rules, polished through years of hard lessons. And then there were the dangers of going during a stampede. When cattle spooked, you had seconds to respond. More than one man got caught mid-process, sprinting with pants down while dodging hooves. You weren't just running for your life. You were trying to save what little dignity you had left. One cowboy even tied a string to his trousers just for emergencies. He called it his getaway rope. On especially dry stretches, the problem wasn't what you did, it was where you buried it. With the sun baking the ground and no rain, for weeks, anything left exposed turned into a warning sign. Buzzards would circle, dogs wouldn't go near, it became a grim competition. Whose mistake would last longest? Even in towns, the problem didn't get better. Outhouses were rare and usually full. If you were lucky, you'd find a saloon with a back alley and a spittoon no one was using. If not, you made do, behind barrels, beside barns, under the stars. You learned to move fast and act casual. Still, despite the discomfort, there was pride in managing it all. Cowboys didn't expect comfort. They didn't ask for clean hands or warm water. They made do with grit, humor, and a bit of luck. And when the drive ended, and they finally reached town, there was no greater joy than a proper bath and a moment alone, even if it was behind a stable with a strong breeze. These stories never made it into history books. No one painted portraits of a cowboy with his trousers down and a wary eye on the horizon. But if you asked the men who rode the trails, they'd tell you this was the real West. Not the gunfights, not the gold, but the quiet battles fought every day with bugs, wind, and a desperate hope for a dry patch of dirt. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't heroic, but it was honest, and that's what made it legendary.